When you, Hank, are working with a student, let's say someone walks in and you're starting that process, what is the process for you in analyzing a golfer's swing, and what's the process of identifying the areas where you need improvement? Like what is kind of your typical go-to strategy when it comes to that?
Good question. Go-to strategy for me is always fixing their big miss. Whatever that student's big miss is, that is my first point that I'm always on. Because to me, there are three things you have to do to play better golf. Number one, you have to eliminate penalty strokes. Number two, you have to eliminate what I call two chips. So anytime you get around the green in close proximity, you have to get the ball on the green in one shot. And then number three, you have to eliminate three putts. So first on that list is penalty shots. And to fix penalty shots, you have to fix that person's big miss. Now with a touring pro, that big miss might happen just, once a round, once a tournament. It might just happen at a bad time. But for amateur golfers, it's a shot that typically happens quite often. So I fix the big miss first. Whatever the big miss is, fix their big miss, then on to the next big miss, then on to the next big miss, because everybody has a miss. There isn't anybody who plays a game that doesn't have a shot that bothers them. So it's analyzing first their ball flight. Golf is what the ball does. Everything you do with the club, everything you do with your body, everything you do with your hands is all to get the golf club to do something different in order to get the ball to do something different. So my first thing that I always look at is what are we trying to fix here? Do they hit the ball too high? Do they hit the ball too low? Do they slice it? Do they hook it? What is their big miss? And that's always my point of start right there. And if you fix their bad shot, you lower their scores. It's really that simple.
Yeah. And what is that process for you like? Is it just simple as, like, let's say 20 swings and you just look at the ball flight data, look at the swing, and then you already kind of see where the problem lies?
Well, when you can look at one swing, usually you don't even need a swing. I mean, you can look at a setup. So if you see somebody that's set up and they're set up underneath it like this, you have an idea that they have a history of hooking the ball. If you see somebody that's set up and the club face, for instance, is just a little bit closed, even if the club face is turned in just a tiny bit and they're set up a little high with their backside, they're probably a slicer. So sometimes you don't even need a swing. I mean, I'll ask them, what is your big miss? Because I want to get an idea of what they think their bad shot is. And, sometimes people will say, oh, Hank, I hit it everywhere. And I'm like, well, we can't fix everywhere. We have to fix one shot or the other. Okay. The way that you get out of missing everywhere is to fix one side of the golf course. And, Alan was talking about that too, when he was talking about Dustin, and, he doesn't want to hook it. He wants to hit that little fade, and, because that draw he feels can turn into a big duck hook. And that's the same thing with everybody who plays the game. Most people that play the game, 90% of people that play golf, they slice. So, that's where your product is so important, because they have a club face problem, and it has to do with their hands getting in the right position coming into the golf ball and throughout the swing in order to get them into that impact position. But the first thing I'll do is I will ask them about their ball flight, the students, and then I'll make an observation based on their shots. Now, maybe they are hitting the ball great when they're there with me for a lesson. Maybe they're better players and they're hitting the ball great. So the thing that I'll look at then is I'll say, okay, which shot is easier for you to play? Can you fade the ball? Can you draw the ball? If you are in a position in your swing where all you can do is hit a draw, but you can't hit a fade, that's not a great position, because, like Alan was pointing out earlier, that draw will soon turn into a hook. That fade will soon turn into a slice. So I think it's important that you be able to hit the ball both ways, that you can hit it right to left, you can hit it left to right. And the reason that you have to be able to do that is, one, to be able to play the game, because ideally at the highest level, you want to be able to work the ball to different pin placements. And at even at a lower level, you want to be able to fix your misses. Okay. And the way that you do that is you have to hit the ball in both directions. Sam Snead made a great comment. He said, when he hooks the ball on the golf course, he'll play with it. And then he goes to the driving range and he cuts it for a half hour. And they said, well, what do you do when you're cutting it too much? He said, well, I play with it on the course because that's what I got going that day. And then I go to the driving range and I hook it for a little while. If you don't have the ability to hit both shots, then you don't have the ability to get yourself going down a straight and narrow path. And that straight and narrow path is one where you're hitting the ball in the fairway or close to it, but not hitting a big miss either way. And the big miss is the big problem. That's the shot that everybody has to fix. So I'll analyze it and see their big miss when they hit. Generally, I want to know what's their bad shot with a driver, because that's the club that's going to curve the most. And they'll do it with every club, but it'll curve the most with a driver. And then what I'll do from there is I'll ask them, and then I watch them, and then I'll have them try to hit different shots and see which shots they can hit and which shots they can't hit if they're a little bit higher level player.
Yeah. You mentioned before that like 90% of the golfers struggle with slicing the ball.
Yep.
And obviously that's a common question, and that we have had also throughout our work in the golf space. What would be your process of fixing the slice, and specifically with the wrist motion and managing the club face as well with that? Like, what would be your process of, let's say I'm an amateur golfer, I come to you for advice. What would be that process for you? How do we go about fixing it?
Well, to me, a couple things. I mean, you only slice for one reason. The club face is open relative to the path of your swing. So that means you have to get the club face more square, and you have to get the path going more into out. All right. The first thing that I always fix when my process is I'm going to fix the club face first, because path mistakes are much easier to fix if you have a better club face. So I figure, okay, why is the club face open? Is the club face open possibly because of their grip? If their hands are on the club and they're in too weak of a position, and you get to the top of the swing and your club face is going to be wide open at the top, I'm going to look at the grip. So that would be one possibility. The next possibility would be my wrist position at the top of my swing. So if my wrist is in a cupped position at the top of the swing, that is going to open the club face. So it's really boils down to grip and wrist position, and you track it throughout the swing. Is it too open at address? Is it too open in the middle of the swing? Is it too open at the top of the swing? Is it too open at the start of the downswing? Some people will get it good at the top and then they'll cup it right when they start down. Or do they have it pretty good and then they come into the ball and they hit with a blocked position or a cupped position at impact? Cupped is going to give you loft. Block is going to give you the shot to the right. Typically, they're going to be both cupped and blocked. I mean, that's the typical situation. So the wrist position is going to be vital in order to get the wrist good and to get the club to be able and the hands to be able to release properly, which means coming through the ball more like this. I have to get the golf club to swing on some semblance of a plane. So if I swing the golf club and I swing the golf club on too upright of a plane, when I swing it on an upright plane, I'm always going to have a blocking motion coming into the ball. If I swing it on more of an arc, I'm going to have more of a releasing motion. Even if my arc is across the golf ball and an out to in swing, even if my arc is across the golf ball, I'm still going to be able to square the face. Now I would hit a pull hook. So I'll get them to swing the club on some arc and then get them to feel like they're squaring their wrists when they come into the ball. So with that slicer, he's got to feel, people say, Do I try to do this? You know, do I have to think about it? Do I actively do it? You have to square your hands when you're coming into the golf ball, or you have to have them in a position that's already square, like a Dustin Johnson, John Rahm, where it's more bowed there. Now the face is already square. But if you've got that club open, it's not just going to automatically, miraculously close itself unless you try to do something. And that's one of the reasons I have a video series called the One Shot Slice Fix. And I will fix golfers' slices in one shot. And the process that I put them through is a lot of practice swings, trying to give them some drills to feel the plane of their swing, getting them to get their wrist positions in the right position, and then teaching them how to release the golf club through the golf ball in order, with their hands, in order to get the club face to square. And then simultaneously, I'm working also on getting the path of the swing more into out. But even if I produce a good release, a good wrist position, a good club face, I produce that, and the path is wrong, at least I've gotten rid of the slice. And that's the first step. I always say there's a road you take to playing good golf. Nowhere on that road is there a slice. No golfer in the history of the game of golf, not one, has ever gone from slicing to good golf. You go from slicing to hooking to good golf. You go from slicing to hooking to learning to fade it, and now you've got great golf, because now you can hit all the shots. But no one has ever gone from slicing to great golf. It's never happened in the history of the world. And people say, well, Trevino's faded the ball. Yes, but he used to be a terrible duck hooker. Ben Hogan hit fades, but he used to be a terrible duck hooker. And both of those players, when they duck hooked, were far better than any amateur golfer ever is. And even like when Alan was talking about Dustin Johnson, and he hates that hook, and that's a shot that he knows will get him in trouble, so he prefers to fade it. Absolutely. But if he hooked it, he would still be better than any amateur golfer. Way better.
And is there any difference with respect to the process you have for fixing a hook for a player? Is it simply kind of the vice versa of a slice, or there's some nuances to that that you have?
No, that's a great question. It's a great point, because if you can fix one, you should be able to fix the other, because all you're doing is the opposite. I mean, the people that are hooking have that club face too close at impact. The face is closed relative to the path of the swing. So if I'm a right-handed player, I got to get the path going more to the left, and I got to get the face open more to the right. And why is that club face closed? Grip and wrist position again. And then when you look at the plane of the swing, the more you swing on an arc, the more closing you're going to get. The more you swing on a straighter upright line, the more opening you're going to get. So if you get your student to swing more upright, you're going to have more of a blocking motion with the release through. If you get them to swing flatter, then they're going to have more closing motion. So it's just a great point you bring up. All you do is just try to feel the opposite.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. And in your opinion, because you've been around golf for a very long time, are there some misconceptions about the golf swing mechanics that are out there that kind of the amateur players tend to follow? Have you seen some kind of trends or some sort of kind of a general patterns that the players essentially are following that are essentially wrong, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, there's always misconceptions, but there's a lot of different ways to do things. So I don't worry so much about all the different ways that people are trying to swing. I just worry about fixing the flight of the golf ball. For amateur golfers, though, if you can focus on just a few things that will influence the golf club, that's the number one thing. You have to be able to influence the golf club. If you influence the golf club, you will change your ball flight. So how do you influence your golf club? Your hands are holding on to the club. Your hands are attached to your arms. Your arms are attached to your shoulders. So that means hands arms, shoulders. Those are the points that I'm going to look at that are going to be the most beneficial. When people are hyper focused on their feet or their knees or their hips, well, I mean, your hands are holding on to the golf club and the golf club is hitting the golf ball. So yeah, you can do something different with your feet. And it's not that I don't tell people to do something with their feet or their legs, but that is only going to influence the ball if your feet, knees, hips, if they do something to change what the golf club's doing. But ultimately, it boils down to the fact that your hands are holding on to the golf club. And that's going to influence the golf ball. So when the amateurs are worried about, this or that, I'm swaying, I'm not doing this with my hips or my knees or my, and I'm like, don't let's not lose sight of the fact that the club is hitting the ball. So you've got to focus some point on that. And if you don't, you're not going to get results.
Yeah. One thing you already touched upon slightly was the grip of the club, and as that being obviously one of the only things that truly kind of affects the club that's in your hands. And we've had this question around what kind of grip should a person have. What is your take on general suggestion? What type of grip should a player aim for? And when it kind of specifically a case for a weak grip, is it something that you should try to fix always and aim for a stronger one? Or what's your opinion about what kind of grip a golfer should have in the golf swing?
Your grip needs to match your swing. It's just as simple as that. There's not people say, Hank, would you look at my grip? And my thought is, and my answer is, are we writing a book or are we fixing your swing? Okay. Because what maybe technically looks like a great grip, okay, that's a technically great grip. It's a technically neutral grip. Okay, then that only works with a neutral swing. So there's not one grip for every swing. There's the one there, you can't just have one grip and this is going to work for everybody. No, there has to be slight adjustments that you can make. Now, in an ideal situation, I might believe that I like to have everybody grip it like this. But that doesn't mean when I coach everybody to grip it like that. I have to give them some relief because you want to fix the golf ball. So if I turn the grip in a little stronger position, it makes it easier for people to close the face. And most people leave it open. So until they get to the point where they're maybe hooking the ball too much, I'm going to give them a little bit of relief. I'm not going to give them a grip that's way over here to compensate for their poor wrist positions. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them a little bit of help, just a little bit of help to help them square the club face. Now, as far as the weak grip is concerned, well, I mean, the weak grip is one where your hands are turned on top of the club, and that matches up better with a wrist position that's a little more bowed. So your grip and your grip matches your swing. It matches your wrist position, and it matches the plane of your swing. So if you have a bowed wrist position, you're going to have a closed club face. If you put a bowed wrist position with a flat swing, you are going to hit big duck hooks. If you have a bowed wrist position and you have a more upright swing, Dustin Johnson, John Rahm gets that arm up. They've got a bowed position, but they've got their arm up and not back around over here. So you see players that have it back around over here. If they have a cupped wrist, well, they have a chance to square the club face. An upright swing with a cupped wrist will not work. A flat swing with a bowed wrist will not work. And the wrist position and the grip matches up with the swing and the swing plane. So that's the balance that you have to strike. And I don't believe you want to get too far off on anything. You don't want a grip to make up for your bad swing. You don't want, a wrist position to make up for your bad swing. Everything needs to be fairly neutral if you're going to have a repeatable swing that's best for most people.
Yeah. One thing, obviously, given that our focus is around the wrists and the golf swing, kind of one of the feels we get that sometimes the people try to follow is they want to be flat at the top of the backswing, and they want to be obviously flat at impact. Is that ultimately the goal the players should try to have in terms of their wrist pattern, or you would suggest something else that they should try to follow?
I mean, you want to have a neutral situation at impact. Okay, to me, slightly turned, slightly bowed wrist, ever so slightly. If I bow it too much, I'm de-lofting the golf club, and then I either have to lean back like that, or I have to have a tremendous amount of club head speed, which a lot of amateur golfers don't have, in order to get the ball in the air. So that's a problem. If you have it in a flat position at the top and you have it in a flat position at the bottom, you're going to find it easier to be more consistent. That's what all this I've watched 70,000 golfers, giving them lessons. That's a position that's going to be easiest for them to hit, but that's not what everybody's going to be in. So some people are going to be a little cupped. Some people might be a little bit bowed, and those all work. But you don't want to get too drastic either way. But I think you're shooting for, a fairly flat wrist position at the top. People say, well, you don't want to teach everybody the same swing. Not everybody's going to have the same swing. It doesn't matter what you teach them. They're not going to have the same swing. But I think, yes, I think you want a more neutral position, and that's going to make it easier for most players. If they're off, there's only two ways you can be off. Either you're going to be too cupped, or you're going to be too bowed. And if you're bowed, then you have to either have a tremendous amount of speed, lean back a lot, or you've got to change that position at impact in order to neutralize it. If you're cupped, then you got a problem where now you've got to make a quick turn to release to get that back to square and impact. Not that won't work, but then people will always follow up with the next question saying, Hank, how can I be more consistent? And it's harder when you're changing your angles a lot. And that's why I'm so intrigued with your products, because I love what it is able to teach people. And I think that this is something that I really feel like instruction has missed out on a lot. I really feel like, this idea that you just hold on to the club and you just, somehow this everything just happens. And that just isn't reality. That just isn't the way it works. I grew up, I first started coaching. I loved Ben Hogan's book, The 5 Lessons, The Modern Fundamentals of Golf. And in his book, he says, your hands actively do nothing. And then he went to great lengths to have some of the most fantastic drawings that have ever appeared in any book, where he showed exactly what your hands do, what your release is like, what the hand position is like. The most iconic drawings maybe ever in a golf instruction book. Hogan's release with his hand coming into the ball. Okay, and yet in the book it says your hands actively do nothing, but it goes to great lengths to show you exactly what the hands do. Okay, and I always thought that book was mistitled. That was my favorite book, but I thought it was mistitled. I thought it should have been How Not to Hook by Ben Hogan. Okay, because Ben Hogan hooked the ball. So he said your hands actively do nothing, but that's coming from somebody who's always hooked the ball, and he's trying not to hook the ball. But 90%, at least 90% of golfers who play the game, they slice the ball and they don't play well. And if they think of their hands actively do nothing, if they don't address their grip and their wrist positions, if they don't address that, they have no chance to play better golf. No chance.
Yeah. When it comes to those specific cases, again, about the slicing and the amateur golfers, what they should do, is there, which obviously is also somewhat of a, there's an extension in their wrists at impact that opens the club face. Are there any specific drills to fixing specifically that you could suggest, or training methods that have been helpful, or maybe what should the amateur players do to just improve that? Are there any tips you would have for them?
Well, obviously the thing that is the best is if you can put your hands on someone, and I will physically show you what the feel is like. Everybody learns they learn from feeling something, they learn from seeing it, and they learn from the spoken word. The worst way to learn is from the spoken word, because you have to take those words and transfer them into feelings and thoughts. Okay. So if you can capture a feel, that's number one. So like you said, drills are good. What's the specific drill for learning to square your hands? I'll have people work on a impact situation. Maybe it's an impact bag. Maybe they're tapping the back of their bag, the bottom of their bag, and just work on this little drill right here just to teach them how I want them to do this. Even just taking your lead hand and just working on doing this. Understanding that the back of your hand is your club face. Essentially, if you hit with the side of your hand, you're leaving it open. If you hit with the back of the hand, you're square. If you cupped, you're adding loft. Okay. If you bow, you're de-lofting. Just understanding that there's loft, there's no loft, there you're open, there you're closed. And understand that if you can square the back of your lead hand to the target at impact and slightly turn your knuckles down so that you reduce the loft, that is where you're going to get your best chance to square the face, to get a powerful hit, and to get ball turf contact. So I will have people just do this right here. Just something just as simple as this. If you can start off and you can do this, then you can work your way into the swing doing that. And then the other point they always make is I try to get people to do it a little earlier, because with those people that slice, they're too late. See, everyone eventually it squares. People don't go like this through the golf ball. Eventually, everyone will square it. They'll be open, they're open, and it squares. Eventually it squares, but it's too late. It has to happen earlier. It has to happen back here more. So that's my point with slicers, is do it back here. If you do it too early, you get a hook. When you get the hook, then we know, okay, that's too early. Do it a little later. Yeah. That's the way that I do it.
Yeah, and when in your experience working with the pro players, have you ever had a case example of a bad wrist pattern in their swing, and what was the process for fixing it in your experience?
Always trying to do the opposite. Always trying to do the opposite. I mean, the wrist position in the swing it's not have I ever. It is always part of what I'm working on. Always. It's not have I ever had. It's I have always had. Because that is the thing that you're trying to get. So the number one thing with professionals is, to me, they tend to get the club back behind them. This is a better player's mistake. The club is behind them coming into the ball, so now it's too shallow. The bottom of the swing is going to be behind the ball, and they're going to tend to cross over. Better players tend to hook. High handicap golfers tend to come down like this. They're doing the opposite. They're coming out to in, If face is too open, wrist is too cupped. Better players tend to do the opposite. They tend to get the club coming back in behind them there. I always try to work in the opposite motion. So when I see somebody that has the club coming down in here too much, generally what I'm going to see is I'm going to see someone who's across the line at the top. And when you're across the line, you're going to tend to drop it in there. So it goes from across the line to there. And I will work on getting them to be more laid off at the top. Feel they point the club more to the left with their wrist in a flatter position. So I'll get them to point it over there, wrist in a flatter position, and then actually feel like in the downswing that they're almost producing a little bit more cup, and then they can square it there. So it will look more like that as they rehearse, as opposed to somebody that goes in, across, and then dropped in like that. Those are the two patterns that you'll see. I mean, the thing that you realize in instruction is, and you brought up the point, when you asked about the hooking versus slicing, it's not, there's not 100 different patterns. It's really two. And if you fix those two, you fixed everybody. See?
Yeah. And one of the things with your experience working with a lot of pro players, obviously, you've been part of their process of developing practice routines, working on different things around their swing.
Right.
Is there anything that you could suggest for an amateur player, what they should try to copy from a pro in developing their own practice routine, and how should they think about constructing their own practice routine? Is it about fixing the biggest issues? Is it trying to be consistent in part of fixing a certain problem? How should they think about constructing their practice routine to kind of get the most out of their time playing golf?
To me, a big part of what I do is practice swings. I like somebody to be able to first, if the first thing they can do is make a good, correct practice swing. That would be number one. Like when you're swinging and you're swinging 100 miles an hour and you're hitting a ball, it's much more difficult to do. But if you take a good practice swing, if you can make a good practice swing and just do it slowly, a slow practice swing. I used to have Tiger hit balls and he'd hit drivers 100 yards on the driving range. And so he showed up in a tournament one time, did that, and people looked at him like, what is he doing? But he was feeling what he was doing in his swing and rehearsing it. That is the first step, I think, for amateurs to start to feel what they need to do different. When you can't do it in full motion, in full speed, you have to break it down. And you break it down into parts, and you break it down in speed. So first things first, maybe they have a problem with their takeaway. Their hands are rolling to the inside too much. I'm going to get them to work on that takeaway. Action and reaction. Everything you do in the takeaway influences the backswing. Everything in the backswing influences the top of the swing. Top of the swing influences how you're going to start the club down. So working on parts and doing it slowly. So working on parts, doing it slowly, and then slowly make a swing without the parts. And then a little faster, a little faster, a little faster. That to me is the best way to do it. Either practicing in front of a mirror and rehearsing what you're doing is a great way to do it. You get the mirror back there, you practice and rehearse, but you have to have an understanding of what it is you're looking at. You don't, a lot of people don't know what they're looking at. But if you can practice in front of a mirror, that's great. And then, have an instructor there that can move you like I do. I move people. So I give them a feel for what they're doing. I don't sit back and just tell them what to do. I move them. I show them the feeling of what they're doing. I move their hands and arms in the club and their wrist position and make it exactly what it's supposed to feel like, so they can feel what they're doing. And then, you know, the next step is being able to have something that will help you feel it. And your product does that. I mean, that's why I've been intrigued about your product. I mean, I ran across your product and sent you an email, and that's how I'm on here today. It's not like I'm not an endorser. I'm just intrigued with how your product can help people play better golf. Okay. And being able to feel what you're doing is what everybody has to do. So how can you feel it? These are intricate wrist positions and positions in the swing. You're not going to be able to just feel this. You have to see it. So you watch yourself do it. And that's one way to do it, but you have to know what it is you're looking at. Okay. And then you feel it, because you can see it, you can feel it. Another way is to have an instructor that can position you and move you around so you can feel it. And then your product helps you do this as well. And the thing is that takes the place of having me there to give you the feel. If I'm there and I have my hands on you, I can get you to feel it every time. The idea that I can just give you some drill, you know, because everybody says the same thing and you ask the same question. You know, Hank, what are the drills you could use to fix this or to do this or to do that? Slow practice swings, watching yourself do it, feeling it, you know, or getting some feedback, you know, from an instructor or, you know, from your HackMotion product. I mean, that's why that's a good product. I mean, I know that you know, people can learn better when they feel it. And other than that, it's not likely to happen. Until they capture the feel, that change is not going to happen. And the problem you have is, like Tiger always said, he says, there's a big difference between feel and real. So you feel something, but is that really what's happening?
Yeah, that's a good line to have. My question to you would be, and we're opening up also the Q&A for the audience. In your experience working with Tiger Woods, was there ever a case where you needed to adjust his wrist angles, and it was a grip wrist angle adjustment you made for him to play a better golf?
Yeah, that was a big part of it, because when he would struggle, he couldn't hit all the different shots, and he would get the club coming into the ball too much from here. He had the club more across the line at the top. So I would get him to be more upright here, get the club more in front of him here, so the wrist is actually a little bit more cupped, if you will, there. And that keeps the club out in front of him, as opposed to being bowed here. So that was a position we worked on, always making sure the takeaway was in check. Same thing when you're pitching a ball. If you're pitching, I might even have him be more there, but he would be out in front of him. Then at the top, we worked on getting the club more to the left and the wrist flatter at the top. Okay. And then I actually would have him try to feel like when he started down, he would actually put a little cup in there. And that would get the club out in front of him, where he could feel the club out in front of him, where he could work the club and the body through together. So that was a big part of fixing his ball flight and getting him to be able to hit different shots. And then hitting the low shots, the stinger shots were more of a release this way, turning the club down, hitting those low shots. And that's another wrist position. Okay. And hitting through the ball like that and then feeling like his arms would relax so that he could break the momentum. Because what happens is at some point that momentum has to break. So if it breaks up this way, you're going to hit a higher shot. And if you break the momentum this way with your arms, then you're going to hit a lower shot. So wrist position was a big part there. When you're hitting a low shot, there's the wrist position. When you're hitting a higher shot, there's more of the wrist position. Could be a pitch, could be a sand shot. I mean, you're hitting more this way. If you're hitting a higher little pitch shot, you're hitting a little more this way. If you're going to drive it down there, he would hit little low shots with a sand wedge. He did little low hooks to spin it into a hill. He did a little low fade, hitting it this way. So yeah, I mean, a big part of what he did was wrist positions.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And one final question before we let you go, and I think we've kind of, it's been very insightful for us here. When it comes to obviously different situations on the golf course with respect to the wrist angles, right? There's certain aspects when it comes to hitting a driver, and certain aspects when it comes to the short game. Are there any kind of differences that you suggest players to have in different situations on the golf course with respect to wrist angles, and how should they think about them? Like, for example, driver versus chipping, obviously could kind of be extremes. Would there be kind of general ideas or that you would suggest players to have?
Well, it all depends on the shot you're going to play. And, when you have extreme wrist angles, then certain shots are going to be harder to play. Okay. So at the tournament, the Tournament of Champions, at Century Tournament Champions, they were making a big deal. Paul Azinger was making a big deal of the fact that Colin Morikawa has a lot of rotation where he really turns his wrist down, and that makes it more difficult for him to pitch the ball, especially into the grain, where the leading edge is going to catch in the grass. So that's a perfect example of somebody doing too much of this for a particular shot. But that's also one of the reasons he's such a good iron player. So it all depends on the shot you're going to play. But yeah, the wrist angle, I mean, if you're going to put more loft, it just boils down to this is loft, that's de-lofting. This is leaving the face more open, that's closing the face. So how you're manipulating your hands through the shot is a part of the game of golf. I mean, you can have, a neutral swing, but there has to be some element of how your hands are coming. You hit a sand shot, you're hitting a sand shot, you hit more this way. When you hit a low shot, you hit more that way. You can't just hit the same way with every single shot. So you have to learn these different nuances if you want to be the absolute complete player. But for most amateur golfers, just trying to get it into a pretty neutral position, I mean, if they can get in a pretty neutral position here, they're going to play so much better golf. Now, okay, how do they take it to the next level? All right, let's learn to really turn it down to hit a low one. Let's learn to not do it quite so much, to throw it up in the air a little bit more. Let's release it this way to hit a pitch shot or a lob shot or a sand shot. Let's release it that way to hit a low spinner. So those are the different changes that you'll make. But absolutely, you have to be able to hit into different wrist positions.